The Dawson house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac on Birchwood Court in Naperville, Illinois, and from the outside, it looked like every other house in the subdivision. Brick facade, two-car garage, a basketball hoop in the driveway, an American flag on a pole beside the front door, and when 19-year-old Sophie Aldridge pulled into the driveway at 6:45 p.m. on a Friday evening in January, she had no reason to believe it was anything other than what it appeared to be. A nice house in a nice neighborhood belonging to a nice family that needed a babysitter. Sophie had been referred by her roommate at North Central College, who had babysat for the Dawsons twice before but couldn't make it that night because of a study group. "They're totally normal," her roommate Jess had said. Two kids, Owen and Lily, 6 and 4. Dad's name is Keith, wife is Rebecca. Kids go to bed at 8. Easy money. Keith Dawson met Sophie at the front door. He was 41, clean-shaven, wearing a blue button-down and khakis, and he smiled warmly and shook her hand and gave her a tour of the house. The kitchen, the kids' rooms, the playroom, the back door that led to the fenced yard, while explaining bedtime routines with the practiced detail of a father who had done this 100 times. The kids were friendly. Owen showed Sophie his dinosaur collection. Lily held her hand and didn't let go for 20 minutes. Rebecca Dawson appeared briefly, touching up her makeup in the hallway mirror, and told Sophie they'd be at a dinner party in Wheaton and would be home by 11. "Help yourself to anything in the kitchen," Keith said. "Wi-Fi passwords on the fridge. Call if you need anything." They left at 7:10 p.m. The evening was unremarkable. Sophie played Candyland with the kids, made them mac and cheese, supervised teeth brushing, read 2 stories, and had both of them asleep by 8:15 p.m. She settled onto the couch in the living room with her laptop, opened her sociology textbook, and began reading a chapter on deviant behavior, a detail that would later feel like the universe's idea of a cruel joke. At 9:30 p.m., Sophie heard a sound from the basement, a thud, muffled, heavy, like something being dropped on a hard surface. She paused, listened. The house was quiet. She told herself it was the furnace, the water heater, the normal anatomy of a house settling in winter, and she went back to her reading. 10 minutes later, another sound, different this time. Not a thud, a voice, low, indistinct, barely audible through the floor beneath her feet, but unmistakably human. Sophie set down her laptop. She sat perfectly still on the couch, holding her breath, and listened with an intensity that made her ears ring. The television was off, the dishwasher was off. The house was wrapped in the deep, thick silence of a winter night in the suburbs, the kind of silence where you can hear the refrigerator cycling and the furnace exhaling through the vents. And through that silence, rising from beneath the floor like something surfacing from deep water, the voice came again. It was muffled, distorted by layers of wood and concrete, but Sophie could make out a cadence. Not conversation, not television, but something rhythmic, repetitive, like someone saying the same thing over and over. Her fingers went cold. She set both feet flat on the hardwood floor as if she could feel the sound through her soles, and she leaned forward on the couch, head tilted, every nerve in her body tuned to the frequency of whatever was happening beneath her. She looked at the basement door. It was in the hallway, between the kitchen and the laundry room, a solid wooden door with a keyed deadbolt locked from the outside. She hadn't noticed the deadbolt during Keith's tour, or maybe she had and it hadn't registered, because why would it? Lots of families lock their basements. Kids fall downstairs. It's a safety precaution. It's normal. Sophie stood up and walked to the basement door. She pressed her ear against the wood, and the voice became clearer. Still muffled, still indistinct, but now she could hear something that made her blood cool by several degrees. It was a woman's voice, and she was saying, "Help me." Sophie's first thought was that it was Rebecca, that she'd come home early, gone to the basement for some reason, and gotten hurt. Her second thought was that it didn't sound like Rebecca. Her third thought was not a thought at all, but a feeling, a cold, liquid feeling that started in her chest and spread outward to her fingertips. The feeling of a picture snapping into focus, of seeing something that was always there, but that your brain refused to assemble because the completed image was too wrong, too impossible, too far outside the boundaries of a nice house on a nice street in Naperville, Illinois. Sophie backed away from the door. She returned to the living room, picked up her phone, and opened a new text to Jess. She typed, "Hey, quick question. When you babysat for the Dawsons before, did you hear anything weird from the basement?" The response came 90 seconds later. "No, but I only babysat during the day. Keith was there both times. Why?" Sophie stared at the text. Keith was there both times. Jess had never been alone in the house. The Dawsons had never left Jess alone with the children. They had only used her when Keith was present, when he could monitor what she heard, where she went, which doors she approached. Tonight was different. Tonight, both adults were gone. Tonight, the house was quiet enough to hear through the floor. And the realization that assembled itself in Sophie's mind in that moment was not a lightning bolt, but a slow, sickening tide. The understanding that she had not been hired tonight because Jess was unavailable, but because the Dawsons needed someone new, someone unfamiliar with the house, someone who wouldn't know what the sound beneath the floor meant, someone who would hear a noise and tell herself it was the furnace and go back to reading her textbook and never think about it again. Sophie was supposed to be a background character in someone else's nightmare, the babysitter who heard nothing, saw nothing, suspected nothing, and left at 11 o'clock with $60 in her pocket and a clear conscience. But Sophie Aldridge was not that person. Sophie did not go back to the basement door. She did not try the deadbolt. She did not call out to the voice. Instead, she did something that required a kind of courage far more difficult than confrontation. She gathered information while appearing to do nothing. She opened her phone's camera, walked casually through the house as if checking on the kids, and photographed the basement door, the deadbolt, the hallway, and the exterior of the house. She noted the address, she checked that the kids were asleep, and then she called 911. The call lasted 2 minutes and 14 seconds. Sophie spoke quietly, calmly, and she told the dispatcher exactly what she'd heard and where she'd heard it. And when the dispatcher asked if she was certain, Sophie said, "There is a woman in the basement asking for help, and the door is locked from the outside with a deadbolt that requires a key. I am certain." Naperville police arrived in 6 minutes. 2 officers entered through the front door. Sophie let them in, pointed to the basement door, and took the children, still sleeping, to the neighbor's house. Wrapped in blankets, carried gently because whatever was about to happen in that house, they didn't need to see it. The officers breached the basement door. What they found was a finished basement that had been subdivided into 2 sections. The front half contained a normal recreation room with a pool table, a flat-screen television, a leather couch, and framed family photographs on a bookshelf. The picture of domestic normalcy that would make anyone who came downstairs for a casual visit see nothing, suspect nothing, and leave satisfied that the Dawson basement was exactly what a basement should be. The back half, separated by a locked, steel-reinforced door hidden behind the bookshelf, which swung outward on concealed hinges, contained a room approximately 10 by 12 feet with a cot bolted to the floor, a portable chemical toilet, a small refrigerator stocked with water bottles and protein shakes, and a woman named Dana Vasquez, 31 years old, a home health aide who had been reported missing from her apartment in Aurora, Illinois 11 days earlier. Dana was malnourished, dehydrated, and showed signs of physical abuse, bruising on her wrists consistent with restraints, a healing laceration above her left eyebrow, and ligature marks on both ankles. But she was conscious, coherent, and when the paramedics brought her up the basement stairs and out through the front door into the cold January night, the frigid air hitting her face for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, she looked at Sophie, who was standing on the neighbor's porch holding Lily, who had woken up and was crying softly into Sophie's shoulder, and said 2 words that Sophie would hear in her sleep for years: "Thank you." Keith Dawson was arrested at the dinner party in Wheaton. He was sitting at a table with 3 other couples, a glass of Cabernet in his hand, laughing at a joke someone had told, and when the 2 plainclothes detectives approached the table and asked him to step outside, he stood up, straightened his tie, and followed them without a word, as if he'd always known this moment would come and had already rehearsed the walk. He did not resist. Rebecca Dawson was arrested separately in the restaurant parking lot. She collapsed against the side of their car and had to be physically supported by an officer while being read her rights. Investigators determined that Rebecca Dawson had full knowledge of Dana's captivity and had actively participated in concealing it. She had purchased the supplies found in the room, had managed Dana's feeding schedule during the days when Keith was at work, and had helped construct the false bookshelf that concealed the reinforced door. Both were charged with kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, aggravated battery, and conspiracy. The investigation revealed that Dana Vasquez had been hired by the Dawsons through a home care agency to assist Keith's elderly mother, who had lived in a separate wing of the house before her death 8 months prior. After the mother's death, the Dawsons had maintained contact with Dana under the pretense of additional work, and she had disappeared after arriving at the Birchwood Court address for what she believed was a routine care shift. Investigators found evidence that the Dawsons had been planning the abduction for at least 2 months, including browser history showing searches for soundproofing materials and reinforced door hardware. Sophie Aldridge returned to North Central College and changed her major from sociology to criminal justice. She graduated 2 years later and is currently working towards a master's degree in forensic psychology. She has never babysat again, and when people ask her how she knew to call the police instead of opening the door herself, instead of confronting Keith, instead of doing any of the things that movies tell you brave people do, she says, "Because the bravest thing I could do was make sure someone with a badge and a gun heard what I heard." The voice was asking for help, and help is not a 19-year-old girl with a sociology textbook. Help is the person you call when the picture you're looking at is too big for you to hold alone.